Hi everyone, thanks for having me here today. It's always really a pleasure for me to be able to travel around regional New South Wales and Australia more widely, and to talk to people about the use of social media, particularly in agriculture. And today, I suppose I will try and relate some of my experiences to the use of social media in the livestock industry as well. So thanks again for having me. My background, I've got a point here. Okay, I won't spend too much time going on about myself, but I think it's important to get a little bit of a snapshot of sort of my background so you can understand how I've come to be standing before you here today and talking about what I'm talking about. So this is obviously a picture of me and my two beautiful girls. My background, I did ag science at Sydney Uni. Long time ago, probably longer than I care to admit, but I did that a while ago, and left and became an agronomist. I was an agronomist in Dubbo and Narrabri for quite a long time, and I also spent time as a rep for Crop Care, a chemical company, so travelling all around Central West, Northwest New South Wales. Lived in Dubbo for about 10 years. During that time, I started up a law degree as well. It was always something that I was very interested in doing, and thought, well, I'll give it a crack, and sort of sent my application in, and yeah, they accepted me. So I thought, well, actually, it was easy. Actually, if they didn't accept me, I could say, oh well, they didn't accept me, I can't do it. But I got accepted, so I thought I better put my best foot forward and complete that. So after completing my law degree, I actually happened to move to Sydney and get my first job as a junior lawyer, and it was like starting a career all over again. I was literally doing, you know, the very dog's body type work, running all over Sydney, doing filing here and there, and just doing whatever the senior partner really needed me to do. So it was very interesting, and I learned a lot, but it was hard starting again. But the importance of that job was that was the first time that I had ever had a job outside agriculture. My whole career up until that point had been in some way, shape or form connected to agriculture and agribusiness, and that was my first job where I wasn't connected at all. And on top of that, we'd just moved to Sydney, so I was feeling very disconnected from something that I'd been involved in for a very long time, and I was also making friends with people in Sydney, and you know, parents of my children's friends who lived in Sydney their whole life and probably will live in Sydney their whole life from this point onwards, and was seeing this big gap between sort of what I knew and understood about where my food came from and what they knew and understood about where their food came from. And it wasn't that there was a lack of understanding, it's just not on their radar. You know, you can't blame them for not having those kinds of issues on their radar. They're running around busily in Sydney, as I am now, just going about their daily lives, and it's not factoring into some of their thoughts. And it's not that I'm wanting to take the approach where I'm ramming the message down their throats that, you know, you should think about farmers every time you sit down and have something to eat. But if we can get that message across even in a subtle way, I think it's really beneficial for the industry. So off the back of that, the firm that I worked for, law firm that I worked for, was very heavily involved in social media. And we were one of the first firms that sort of formally went into social media law, doing social media policies for different companies and things like that. So they encouraged me to get onto Twitter and to use Twitter and to be really active in social media. And one of the first things I did when I got onto Twitter was like, I wanted to see what was happening out west. You know, were they getting much rain? Were people, you know, how was harvest going? All sorts of questions like that I had access to for a long time, and then all of a sudden was cut off. And when I started to look, I noticed there really wasn't a lot of information out there like that. So sent out a tweet, said, look, is anyone interested in forming a bit of a digital community really, where we talk about these types of things? And I got two guys, Tom Whitty and Sam Livingston, who came straight back to me and said, yep, fantastic idea, we think it's great. There's a similar concept in the States called Ag Chat. And from that, Ag Chattels was born. And I'll talk about Ag Chattels a little later on in the piece. Okay, so just a quick outline of what I'll cover in today's presentation. So I'll talk a little bit about why I think social media is important. I've already touched a little bit on that. I'll give a quick overview of some commonly used social media platforms. Some of you will be very familiar with them, some of you maybe not, so I'll go over those. I'll go over some tips for successful Twitter use, and I will focus on Twitter because that seems to be the one that I get a lot of questions on. I'm happy to take any questions on any social media platform, but for the purposes of the presentation, I do get a lot of questions on Twitter, so with the time that I've got, I thought I'd focus on that. And then I'll talk more broadly about purpose, strategy, and some tips and no-nos that I've sort of learnt and picked up along the way. And then lastly, I'll talk about social media in agriculture, and there's some interesting statistics that have come out just recently that gives you a bit of a snapshot on where social media use is sitting in terms of the agricultural community, how many people are using it, whether it's something that's growing, that sort of thing. So there's some stats out on that, and I'll cover off on that at the end. Okay, in terms of how it's being used, some of you, or most of you I'd say, probably have a fair idea in terms of how social media is being used. I liken social media to just an evolution of communications. I mean, once we just had letters, then we had fax machines and emails, and now we have social media. It's just another layer on top of all those other forms of communication. It doesn't replace any one of those forms of communication, but it's another way to communicate. It's another way to be able to get your messages across, communicate with each other, and sort of enhance all those other forms of communication that you're currently using. It's being used to form personal connections. A lot of people ask me after winning the Rural Women's Award last year, you know, what's been one of the, you know, the most important things that you've got out of using social media, and for me, that's really the answer. For me, it's just broadened my network hugely. I get invited now to come and speak at lots of different events. I've met people from all over the country that I'd never have the opportunity to meet before, and they're working in really interesting fields, doing really interesting work. In a nutshell, it has broadened my network beyond belief, so that's the most important thing for me personally. It's being used to tell stories, and don't underestimate the power of storytelling and being able to tell your story to the wider public. A lot of people might think, oh, well, I'm not that interesting, there's nothing really interesting about my farm or about my business or about what I do. Believe me, it is interesting, and people are interested to read that. It's being used by businesses for PR and marketing. So as was mentioned in the introduction, I work for New South Wales Farmers. We use social media quite heavily to talk about what we do from a PR and marketing point of view. We also use it to communicate about different issues that are on the hop, and there's always a lot with New South Wales Farmers, but it's another way for us to be able to get our brand out there and talk about what we do. And it's being also used by rural Australians. Why is social media important? So I've run through all that, and really, yeah, you've probably got a good idea of, you know, why I think social media is important. But look, I can appreciate that you're probably never really going to pick it up and invest the time in it unless you understand why it's important for you. And look, it may not be clear from the outset why it's important for you, but it will become clearer as to why you should spend time in it. Everyone says social media is free to use, and yes, the platforms to a degree are free to use, well, most of them are free to use, but it does involve an investment of your time, and your time is money, as we all know. So I'll talk about that a little bit later on as well, but don't think of social media as being free, because you do have to invest your time in using it as well. So it allows you to tell your story to the world. You have a worldwide audience. It's not just an audience like here I'm sitting talking to you, or a one-on-one conversation that you might be having with someone somewhere. It allows you to tell your world to tell your story to an almost infinite amount of people, depending on how many followers you garner and how widely your message spreads. There's no other platform that enables you to do that. And it gives you a tool to have a voice and influence. So when I talk about having a voice and influence, if I can relate my perception of sort of what happened, and it was already touched on a little bit by Dave earlier, when the first live exports crisis hit, I was actually working for the law firm in Sydney that I described before, and I was a relative newbie to Twitter, but I remember going into work after that story in the morning and opening up TweetDeck, like I did every morning, just to see what was happening on Twitter. Obviously that was very much at the forefront of my mind that morning. I was thinking, wow, this is, I just don't really know how to process this, what's going to happen out of this. Opening up Twitter and really all that I could see, and my whole stream was just filled with ban live export, ban live export, ban live export from every corner of Australia. The minister was just getting barraged with message after message, the Prime Minister, anyone that had any influence in terms of making decisions about how live exports was to continue was just, there was no voice amongst any of those voices that brought any balance to the conversation. It was just ban it. And what did we see from that? It was banned. There was no, I couldn't, it was just a sea of voices is how I describe it. I could not see one voice in amongst all of that brought any balance to the conversation at all. Further on down the track, when we had the issues in Pakistan just recently, and that happened, and I'm really pleased to see that when I went back to look at social media after that happened, that there was actually a really strong voice there. It wasn't perhaps as strong as some of the voices that are there calling for bans on live export, and even the more extreme messages that are out there calling for people to be vegans, and there's a whole vegan agenda as well. But there was at least some balance there, and there were producers there and people that were involved in the industry that were able to answer people's questions. So people in Sydney, like me, but who may not have had any exposure to agribusiness before, could actually ask questions about, well, is this really true? Do you people really, abuse your animals? Are you happy for them to go off and be like this? And they could ask those questions and have balance back in the debate. And I just thought it was a much more measured conversation, and we didn't see the fallout, nothing like what we did the first time. So it presents that real face to the public. And as I've already related, it's an extremely powerful communication tool. As I already touched on, don't overlook the power of your real story, and I think that's probably one of social media's greatest assets. So forums such as AgChatOz allow rural voices to be heard, and look, it is inevitable. Social media is here to stay. There's a lot of other industries that have just picked up and run with it. If you're sort of getting into social media now from an agricultural point of view, I think it's still a very good time. Any time is really a good time to get involved in social media. But I think the industry as a whole is perhaps not as on the front foot in terms of its involvement in social media as some other industries, but what that does is give you an advantage in that if you want to be involved in it now is a good time to do it. So an overview of some commonly used platforms. Most of you are probably fairly familiar with Facebook. It's a social networking service that lets you connect with your friends and family, or anyone really, but most people use it to connect with friends and family. It's different from other social networks as you can have fairly extensive privacy controls on it. So if you are worried about that aspect of it, Facebook lets you sort of tailor that to really lock it down if that's something that you want to do and you wanted to have very limited visibility on your profile. And it gets new features and updates on a regular basis. You can also on Facebook have a Facebook page. So aside from your personal profile, you can have a page for your business or your association, or you can have a page for your event. There's a lot of different flexibility. So I've just taken a screenshot there the other night of the Angus Australia page. Talks a little bit about what Angus Australia is, has some photos, currently at 654 likes, and it's telling me actually that 5 of my friends on Facebook actually already like the Angus Australia page, and this down the bottom will give me regular updates about what Angus Australia is doing. So it's if I can relate a New South Wales farmers, the way we use Facebook is we have a lot of communication tools that enable us to directly communicate with our members. So internal communications is what I like to call it. But Facebook is a brilliant way for us to be able to communicate much more broadly beyond our membership about what we might be working on. And Angus Australia page will be doing the same kind of thing. YouTube, video sharing website. Bit of trivia, was created by 3 former PayPal employees. YouTube is actually probably the most used social media platform by farmers. I do these talks quite a lot, and sometimes I'll get the question at the end of the talk, or maybe even at the beginning of the talk. And that's probably why I have this slide in here now, because I do get some people that say, look, it's just a total waste of time. I'm never going to be involved in social media. Why would I spend my time doing that? And then I'll ask them, well, do you use YouTube? And they say, oh yeah, I use it all the time. If I'm trying to work out how to fix, you know, whatever piece of machinery it is, I just go and look it up on YouTube. And they don't realise that that actually is social media. So YouTube's really handy, and it has lots of really good funny cat videos on there as well. So they get really high ratings of funny cat videos. This is an example of a YouTube clip. I always like to throw this example in there because it's to give you some background. Some free farmers from Armatree produced a video back in 2010. It was around harvest time. They had a heap of rain at harvest time, and the morale in their area just plummeted. They couldn't harvest. Everything was just sopping wet. So they went out and made a video called Baywatch at Armatree. And there's three farmers running around the paddock trying to imitate Pamela Anderson with their drench packs and things like that, trying to be Baywatch at Armatree. And they just did it for a bit of fun because they couldn't harvest. They were worried about their mates, obviously worried about their families. It was a total washout year. And what happened was it went viral. So I think I took this screenshot a few weeks ago, and it was at 115,000 views. I mean, tell me what other platform you can use where three farmers from Armatree, which if anyone's ever been to Armatree, you know that there's not really much at Armatree. It's probably best described as a locality. There are a couple of buildings there, but it's not really much of a town in terms of size. In what world can three farmers from Armatree get 115,000 views on a Baywatch imitation video? So I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at that one if you haven't, because it is very funny. LinkedIn, easiest way to describe LinkedIn is it's Facebook for professionals. The main purpose of the site is to allow you to maintain contact with people that you might meet at events like this or through your business dealings. I don't really carry or hold on to people's business cards anymore. I just prefer to connect with them on LinkedIn, and then I have all their details in here all the time. It's actually a really good way to make and keep those connections. I mean, if you're working for someone and then you move somewhere else, at least you've always got your LinkedIn connections with you when you move. It's a great way to collate all that information. So that's just a little example of my LinkedIn profile. Have a photo, have a little bio about who you are, what you do. The thing I like about LinkedIn as well is that it's different to other profiles is I can see who's if I clicked on that, that's actually a link, and that'll take me through to another page where I can actually see who's been looking at my profile. So I kind of like that. It's nice to know who's been spying on me, but at the same time, it means that if I go and look at other people's profile, they know that I've been looking at them, which is completely fine, but it's just nice to have that. Twitter. This is the one, like I said earlier, that I get the most questions on. I think it's probably the one, it's actually, I find it probably the easiest one to use, but I think if you haven't used it before, it's almost the most scary one in a way. It's an online social networking service for broadcasting news, information, and for communicating. It's actually a microblog. So if you've heard of blogs, Twitter is a microblog. So your blogs are restricted to 140 characters, so a really short, sharp snippet of information. You can link photos, you can link articles, you can link all sorts of things to Twitter. The reason it was 140 characters was because back when SMS text messages were first developed, they were restricted to 140 characters. Twitter was developing around about the same time, so they made it 140 characters. And in the end, they decided that that was actually a really good thing, that they had it restricted to 140 characters. It ended up being something that people liked about Twitter, so they kept that. So you can send a short message to a group of people. Once you sign up to Twitter, people start following you, and you can start following other people. So if you've got followers, you can send a message out that all of your followers see. So I sent out a message this morning, so really looking forward to talking about social media. Yes, you saw that at the Youngest Australia conference, and people that follow me can see it, and also people that follow a hashtag, and I don't want to lose you on the hashtags, but I will go into the hashtags, but don't worry about hashtags just yet. So people that follow me can actually see that message. I can send a short message to a specific person publicly. So if I want to get a message to Julia Gillard, I can send her a message on Twitter. I don't know if she reads it or not. I mean, she's got heaps of followers, but I can actually send a message to her. I can send a short, and then I can send messages to people privately as well, and people can send me messages privately. So AgChatOz really centres around Twitter. That's really what we work around and where our digital community comes together. It's a digital, what we like to call advocacy platform, and it's now in its third year. As I've already related, the founders, myself, Tom Whitty and Sam Livingston, and our sole purpose at the start, and it still is our sole purpose, is to raise the profile of Australian agriculture using social media. And how we do that, it centres around a weekly discussion. It's on a Tuesday night from 8 o'clock on Twitter using the hashtag AgChatOz. I'll go into hashtags in the next couple of slides because that's another really important element for you to try and get your head around in terms of Twitter, because hashtags is a really good way to filter out all the rubbish that's on Twitter. So tips for successful social media use. And when I say tips for successful social media use, I'll relate them probably most to Twitter in terms of my real life examples, but a lot of these tips can be related to really all social media platforms. And this will become evident, this picture here will become evident on the next slide, why that picture is there. If you don't take anything else away from my presentation today, or you don't remember anything else from my presentation today, just remember this. When you sign up to Twitter, you have the option of filling out your profile. Part of filling out your profile and updating your profile includes putting a picture of something, preferably yourself, but putting a picture of something up. If you don't put any kind of picture up, this is the default picture that Twitter gives you. And no one wants to talk to eggs on Twitter. You're like a Twitter loser, basically, if you're an egg. So if you don't remember anything else today, please remember to update your profile pic. So my Twitter rules, apart from not being an egg, is to be true to yourself and others. It's actually, that's common sense and it's easier that way. You don't need to uphold any kind of facade or anything like that. It's much easier just to be like that. Don't pass off other people's tweets as your own. Always give credit where credit's due. Don't retweet things without reading the content. Most of the time you'll probably be okay, but there may be an occasion where you'll retweet something that you didn't want to retweet and you'll find out about it later. Be courteous and thank people that retweet you or mention you in a good light, that is. You might not want to thank people that might mention you in a bad light. Add original content, so don't just retweet, and I should take a step back and explain what a retweet is. A retweet is if you see something that someone's tweeted and you think, oh, that's kind of good, or I agree with that, you can press a button that retweets it, and what that does is take that message and then send it out to your followers. So the message keeps on going. So it's a really good function to have, but don't just always be retweeting. Add your own original content. Follow people to engage and learn and think broader than just profit. I mean, I see some companies that are using social media and Twitter, for example, and they don't engage, they're just using it to push their products or push their message, whatever that might be. And there is a place for that in social media, but it's a much more subtle form of marketing. You want to include that as part of a broader dialogue that you might be having. And don't use auto anything. There is a function that you can schedule tweets, and you can even link your Twitter account to your Facebook account, and everything can be all automated and fantastic. I just don't like it. I can tell easily who the organisations are and the people are that schedule their tweets, because they'll schedule a tweet and then you'll say, oh, that's interesting. You might ask a question back and there's no one there. So don't use auto anything. It's much better just to build up your followers organically. Hashtags. So all that said and done, and a question that comes up a lot is, but how do I get past all the rubbish on Twitter? And I will say from the outset that there is quite a lot of rubbish on Twitter. And nobody, I'll always use this example, I mean, nobody wants to know about Kim Kardashian and Kanye West's relationship and when she's having her baby and what she's had for breakfast and all that. I mean, you can find that out on Twitter if you want to, but really I don't care, and I would assume that you don't care either. So hashtags are a way to filter out all of that junk that's on social media. There's some great information on social media, but you do need a couple of tricks in terms of how to find it. I've already showed you up there before we had the hashtag AgChatOz. That's a great hashtag to start with if you're wanting to focus on agricultural issues. So you can go into Twitter, search for that hashtag AgChatOz, and all the tweets about people tweeting about what's going on in agriculture in Australia will come up. Hashtags, for those of you that watch Q&A, you'll see down the bottom of the screen that, popping up the tweets. Every one of those tweets contains the hashtag Q&A. So that's really a digital community that's coming together talking about Q&A. Just as an aside, that hashtag has become that busy now that I can't follow it. You know, every time I refresh, there's like 100 new tweets. So it's probably not the best example, but it gives you a taste of what I'm talking about. And you can use them to your advantage. So if you want to reach a political audience, which sometimes I do in my job, I would tweet something out, whatever the message might be, and I would include the hashtag. If it was a federal political issue, I'd include the hashtag Ozpoll. That's quite a popular hashtag. And if it was a New South Wales political issue, I'd use the hashtag NSW poll. You can create your own hashtag, just like I created a hashtag called AgChatOz. You can create your own hashtag, and a lot of people do that for events. So you might like to, so for an example, if we were tweeting about this event, then there might be a hashtag Angus Australia. You can use them to add context. It took me a while to get this when I first got onto Twitter. And as you would know, in emails and any form of digital communication, it can be really hard to get context across. So things like sarcasm or things like that, they just don't come across that well on any form of digital media unless you're very good at it. So you can use them to add context. So you could say, listening to the guru Danica Lees, and that is my Twitter account, talk about social media, what a legend. And that's obviously not being sarcastic at all. So the tip with hashtags, I will say, is to just not make them too long. So this is an example of sort of a bad hashtag that is too long, because if you'll remember, there is a 140 character limit on Twitter. You don't want your hashtag to take up that whole 140 character limit. Third-party Twitter platforms, I'll just touch on briefly. They are, when you log in to Twitter, you can go to twitter.com and log in to Twitter. A third-party Twitter platform is something that works between twitter.com and your phone or your iPad or even your PC or Mac. To make it easier for you to follow accounts. It just makes the information available in an easier to follow way. And I've got a screenshot on the next slide that'll show you. They're great for following different hashtags. They're a simpler and easier way to use Twitter, especially if you have multiple accounts. Once you get used to Twitter, perhaps you can go back to this slide and see and understand perhaps a bit more what I'm talking about. Personally, I use TweetDeck on my computer and Tweetbot, which is an app on my iPad and my iPhones, and then there's some other popular choices down there as well. So TweetChat in particular is a very popular one. I don't personally use it, but a lot of people that participate in AgChatOz use TweetChat, and they say it's really good. It's a really easy way for you to be able to follow the conversation. So this is an example of TweetDeck, and don't get scared, I know it's a lot on one screen, but I can go through it with you. So TweetDeck is a small piece of software that you download onto your computer, and it works by having columns. So you can sort of sift or filter the tweets, I suppose, into some kind of meaningful way for you. So this here is my timeline. So this, when I'm sitting at my computer, this timeline is sort of always moving. I'm not really actually paying that much attention to it because I just couldn't possibly. I mean, you can see the timelines down there. I mean, when I took this screenshot, there was a tweet right at that time, then 18 seconds before that there was a tweet, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, 47 seconds. I mean, you can imagine how fast that column moves when you start to follow quite a few people. So I have that there, and sometimes I will see something interesting come up in it, but generally it's too hard for me to follow that. So what I do is have these columns where I can follow different things. So obviously I always have AgChatOz, the hashtag, up there, and you can see every single tweet in that column contains the hashtag AgChatOz. Some of them contain more than one hashtag because they might be trying to reach a larger audience, but every single one contains AgChatOz as a hashtag. So that's an example of hashtags at work. You can also just tweet without a hashtag. You can just search for a term, just search for some words, whatever it is that you might be looking at. So for the purposes of today's presentation, I just did a search on Angus Australia, and these were all the different tweets that came up with Angus Australia in it. Some of them obviously aren't related to the actual Angus Australia, but they're all the tweets that contain the word Angus and contain the word Australia. And the other thing you can do is set up lists. So you can set up lists of particular groups of people that you might like to follow. Because of my job, I am always following what state politicians are saying, and sometimes following what the federal politicians are saying, and it's amazing what they say sometimes on Twitter. I just think, did you really just send that out for the whole world to see? But it is a great way to keep in touch with what's going on, and it's actually a really great way to get messages to politicians as well. This little breakout box here, I just broke it out to show you that this column here is anyone that has commented about me or done something that affects me on one of my social media profiles. So TweetDeck can actually be linked to your Facebook as well. So someone has said if they like something that I've said on Facebook, it comes up here, all my little notifications about me, and you can really get quite fancy about how you filter that if you want to. But TweetDeck will do these two columns for you automatically as soon as you log in, and then you can add these extra columns. Twitter statistics, if you want to, you can start to have a look at some Twitter stats. They are interesting if you have time, or if you're running a particular campaign, or you want to see how many people are looking at your different posts that you put up. Facebook has a really good one that's just in the back of the Pages function called Insights, which is it's really easy to use, and it gives you an idea on how far your messages might be going. Some other platforms are there in terms of Twitter statistics worth going and having a look at. There are paying platforms as well. It all depends on the level of information that you want to get. So 5 best Twitter practices, just to rehash on what I've spoken about. So maintaining visibility is to tweet often and tweet in the afternoon. I don't know about this tweeting in the afternoon. Some people have different theories about when it's best to tweet, but I think tweeting often is probably just a good enough goal to start with. Rally up support, so tweet at people, have conversations with followers, and it pays to have Twitter fans, and that means Twitter followers. So in a nutshell, engage. So engage with people, have conversations with people. Follow people that retweet your messages. Share unique content. So I talked about that before, about providing useful content to people. People will follow you if you're providing useful information. Tweet what you see and where you see it. Again, you might not think it's interesting, but you'd be surprised. Other people do find it very interesting. Particularly just even pictures on the farm, what you're doing on the farm, it can be really interesting to tweet that out. And be as concise as possible in your wording. I mean, that's a given. You have to be concise anyway. You only have 140 characters. Okay, strategy. This is for perhaps a little bit further down the track, once you get the hang of and master those platforms, getting the most out of them. Monitoring's quite important. It's important to listen to your community, and if you're using it for business, to listen to your market and listen to what's being said. What are people interested in? Respond. It gives you can have an opportunity to respond to criticism, and you can have input into industry events. So if there are particular conferences going on and you're seeing a bit of dialogue on Twitter going on about a particular issue that you're interested in, you can have input into that without actually being at the event. You can develop a bit of a strategy. This point probably goes, quite far in terms of having a very formal strategy in place. it's not something I've sort of used strategy more on the run, I suppose, as a bit of an ad hoc strategy. Strategy is important if you want to tie it into part of a wider communications plan that you might have for your business. So not so much really from a personal point of view, but if you have a whole social media strategy for a business, for example, it needs to tie in with your other comms that you might have, like your website and email and things like that. Policy and guidelines. If you have employees, it's important to have a social media policy in place about what they can and can't say about your business. Training on that policy is obviously very important. Implementation, I've touched on this already. Don't go away from this thinking that you have to have a Twitter account, a YouTube account, a Facebook account, a Facebook page, a LinkedIn page, and everything all at once. You certainly don't. Choose one platform that you think is going to work for you, give it a try, and then when you've sort of mastered that, move on to the next one. And then you'll start to understand what works and what doesn't. You can consider abiding by a bit of a personal social media policy. Again, it's not something that I have written down, in my top drawer next to my bed what my personal social media policy is, but I have an idea in my mind in terms of how I'm going to approach social media. So Facebook, I keep it fairly tight. It's just for family and friends. I have pictures of what I'm doing on holidays, my kids, things like that on there. I don't think really my boss wants to see that, so I keep that just family and friends. LinkedIn, keep that very professional. It's connections that I meet through work, and Twitter. It's a little bit of a mix on Twitter, but it's probably much more leaning towards the professional side than the personal side. And I very rarely talk about, my kids, for instance, on Twitter. Not because I don't love them, but just because it's just not the right platform for that. And it's going out to the whole wide world, Twitter is. Be the greatest protector and custodian of your own online reputation. So a good idea is to have a Google alert set on yourself. It's not narcissistic, it's just a really good idea to see what people might be saying about you. And if in doubt, just don't send it out, as I've already touched on. Your messages on social media go out to the whole wide world, with the exception of perhaps Facebook if you have privacy controls on Facebook. Be open, transparent and authentic. Don't ever be rude or abusive. There are rude and abusive people on there, just don't engage with them. And there's a block button on there, just use the block button. And have an opinion, but don't use it as a soapbox, use it to engage. I'm getting tight on time, so I might just quickly go over the do's and don'ts for campaigns, but it fairly well just repeats what I've spoken about before. Knowing your audience, staying on message, using it to engage, not just one-way communication, it's two-way communication. And whilst it's important to be on social media, if you don't have time to do it properly, wait until you do. This is the second last slide, just to give you a taste of where social media and agriculture is at the moment. The draft report came out at the end of 2012, put together by Hardman Communications. At the moment, through their work, they found that 1 in 6 farmers, so 18%, and just under half of the industry leaders, 46%, are using social media socially. And over the coming years, through their research, they found that that was set to increase to a potential of 1/3 of farmers and half of industry key opinion leaders. So a big rise in the farmers and a little bit of a rise in the industry leaders. And the social media platforms used by both groups were Facebook and YouTube, which I've already touched on. Just to finish off, I really like this quote. This was a quote in an ABC article after Troy and Stacey Hadrick came to visit Australia. I think it was last year. And it was a quote from Don Heatley, who said that as an industry, we have to grasp this medium, get with it and get on with it. And we must use it to our advantage and not have others use it to our disadvantage. And I'll leave you with that message. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Danica. We've got time for one quick question.
Sure.
Yes, Sonia's we'll take this as a comment, not a question.
Okay, alrighty. Sorry to take over.
No, not at all.
Alrighty. Just quickly, I wanted to talk about Angus Australia. If you weren't here yesterday, I did a little talk and included a little part about social media. For Angus Australia, a couple of things I wanted to say to you was, in the last 2 years, we've started using social media and our followers are growing every day. which is so, that's a really good thing, and we're getting our message through. The other thing is, if you have Facebook and Twitter logos on your website, it'll raise you up the Google rankings, so you'll appear higher on the Google rankings, which is a really important thing.
That's a really good point.
The other thing I wanted to say was, with our website advertising, and I'm not promoting that, but when people have YouTube video of their animals attached to these website ads, they get so many hits. So they could see the way your animals move just through going through the YouTube clip. And those clips are really quick and easy to make on farm. I think that's about it, but yeah, sorry to interject there.
I think they're great comments.
Yeah,
No,
but I
they're
think
really
that
good
it is working for us. We've put our toe in the water in the last couple of years, and we'll continue to do that and to expand on that.
Thanks, Sonia, and thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Thanks very much.
No problems. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Sonia.